Here, check this out in this federal petition form, right? This is like the big one. This is like, you know, the top dog, the top level form of the entire United States of America. This is like the most serious, badass, highest level ranking form that you could potentially fill in the world, on the face of planet Earth, right? This is like the serious bad boy form. So it actually says you can fill it in how you want, as long as you put the truth. But you've got a little bit of freedom to be creative with it in writing and filling in and stuff. I've kind of filled it in sort of like I'm petitioning, but on behalf of someone else. I've made that clear in what I've written. I've filled in as much information as I can. But read this, right? It says, right, before filling out the application form, please make sure you meet these 3 requirements, right? It says 1, you were convicted in a federal criminal court, not a state or military court. Well, that's like Supreme Court, surely. The Supreme Court goes up to federal level, surely, doesn't it? But I know that in the presidential election, different states have different laws, so there's different laws you've got to abide by, but the actual presidential election itself is a federal contest. The rules for how to vote for the president are under federal law, but there was meant to be loads of different state law rules for entering, which is quite ridiculous. But I know it was Supreme Court. I thought Supreme Court was meant to be like, you know, federal court or whatever. But anyway, it's a federal contest. It's ballot access to a federal election, surely. But anyway, get this right. You are currently serving a federal prison sentence or a term of federal supervision, such as parole, supervised release, or probation, and you do not have any court challenges currently pending against you, your conviction or sentence, such as general appeal or motion under 28 USC 2255. This requirement does not apply to capital cases. So it's saying, it's trying to make out that you need to be in prison or you've got some kind of federal supervision, which is kind of like, you know, community service or something. Parole, supervised release, and prohibition. But this is the thing, right? There's a word in this, right? Hold on a second. There's a bit on false statements. A knowing and willful false statement in a document submitted to the government may subject you to criminal punishment, including up to 5 years imprisonment and a £250,000 fine. Well, I made it clear what I was actually asking for, and there's nothing really that stops someone petitioning on behalf of someone else, really. So we've got this clemency word. No appeal from a denial of clemency. The president alone has the power to commute a sentence for a federal offence. It is an extraordinary remedy that is very rarely granted. Still a remedy, though. You will be notified when a final decision is made on your petition, and there is no appeal from the president's decision to deny a clemency request. Now get this here. This is the bit that gets me now, right? It's got me scratching my head, this bit, right? Because I'm doing this because, like, for Robert F. Kennedy Jr., I don't see why I can't. I don't see why someone else can't petition for someone else's release. You know, it's like right to petition, isn't it? Right of the subject, any subject you want. It says here, right, this is the bit here, look. To the President of the United States. This is like a declaration. It says, the undersigned petitioner, well, anywhere undersigned, obviously, I have written down further below who I am, and I'm signing the bottom of the form. Undersigned is where you sign it, but you can fill it in on behalf of someone else who you want to be released. I don't see why not, right? A person subject to federal imprisonment. Oh, look, see there. Look at that there. Oh, it says federal imprisonment or, not and. This is really important, like in Magna Carta, when it says, like, you can be adjudged by the law of the land or by the judgment of your own peers. So my phone just powered off on me then, shut down. Right. So this is a statement here. This is the part when it says it's addressed. This part, this section of it, right? This little part here, after you get all the way down through the first part of it, is where it says addressed to the President. It says, to the President of the United States, the undersigned petitioner, which means eventually at the bottom, who's undersigned is the person who actually eventually signs it. A person subject to federal imprisonment or other a restriction. You don't have to be imprisoned. Or other restriction. You don't have to be in prison. But what I was saying earlier on is that you can only really use the form if you're in prison or like on probation or you know, like community service or probation or something like that, you know, supervised release or whatever it is, right? It makes it sound like you've got to be convicted of a criminal offence, right? But here, it doesn't say that you have to be in prison or criminal offence. Here it says the undersigned petitioner, who eventually signs it on the matter that is set out in the petition, a person subject to federal imprisonment, it says, or other restriction. Well, that means a federal restriction, a federal imprisonment, or a federal restriction. Asks for commutation of sentence and in support thereof states as follows. Well, that ballot access is a restriction. He's being barred. That's how they word it. They've actually worded it in the order that he's barred from being allowed to enter the ballot for president. But it's in the state of New York, but it's for a federal competition. It's run under federal law. The rules for that, the creation of the election is in federal state law. Federal law with state rules as well. So you can't say that it's state law only because it's a federal contest. It's been restricted from the federal contest in some states, but that's not state law. They've got different rules, but it's still the same competition. He's got a ballot access restriction on him in a federal contest for President of the United States of America, which is created. The whole competition is created under federal law, and it's a federal law that creates any state rules. So this actually doesn't say it has to be criminal. It says federal imprisonment or another restriction. You can have restrictions. You can have a restriction which is not criminal. Here it doesn't say the restriction has to be criminal. It just says federal. It has to be federal. A federal restriction. So it only has to be a federal restriction. So I don't think it has to be a criminal matter. And because this doesn't say it has to be criminal, this only says federal restriction. You can have a federal restriction which is a civil restriction. So therefore, this form actually is giving itself false information, because up here it claims that it has to be convicted of a federal criminal court, not a state or military court. But The state court, but the Supreme Court has put a restriction on a federal contest. Surely, it's a federal restriction. It's a state component of a federal law competition. Surely. So I don't think this petition form is entirely correct itself. I think this petition form is giving false information. I think this petition form itself contains a falsehood and a contradiction and error.